morning is the first of our Womenetics summer series. We're excited to have extended conversations with the 2010 POW Award winners as we further explore topics from the POW Luncheon. After the POW Awards in April, many of you, lots of you, told us that you wanted to hear more from these purposeful women. Well, you have that opportunity today. In July and August, Womenetics will also host 2 more summer series events designed to help you learn more about these terrific women who have spurred innovation, they have seized opportunities, they have overcome challenges, and shifted their organizations, all while creating their own paths to success in their individual and diverse fields. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator today, May Douglas. As Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer for Cox Communications, May brings a wealth of experience and business prowess to the organization and to this panel. We are pleased to have her insight and experience honed from over 35 years in human resources and for her more recent roles at Cox. Currently, May continues to make her mark in the community and serves on the Henry W. Grady Health System Foundation to improve the quality of health care services for Metro Atlanta's indigent, uninsured, and critical care patients. Please give me a warm welcome to May Douglas.
Good morning, everyone. I am really delighted to be here, and it really is an honor to facilitate this panel this morning. I unfortunately missed the POW Awards, so it is truly an honor to be here to get a little slice of what I missed at the luncheon. What I'd like to do at this point is to invite each of our panelists to come forward. So as I introduce you, if you would come and join me at the panelist table, that would be great. First is Kathy Betty, owner of Atlanta Dream. From becoming one of Ernst & Young's first female partners to her current role as owner of the Atlanta Dream, Kathy Betty is a business force to be reckoned with. As the first woman in Atlanta history to own a professional sports team, Betty brought back hope to the dream and with a wealth of business sense to the franchise. The team is currently 9-3 in standing. Kathy Betty. Shelley Patton is President, PRI Development Services. Shelley works from the ground up to create affordable housing in the Atlanta area. As a nonprofit developer of quality, affordable housing with PRI Development, she bridges both the public and private sectors to accomplish her goals. Shelley, will you join us at the panel? Our next panelist is Sally Davis. As the Vice President for Institutional Advancement, Marketing, and Communications for Morehouse School of Medicine, Sally Davis certainly has her track shoes on. Davis has been responsible for the transformation of Morehouse College of Medicine's development strategy from only fundraising to a marketing, branding, and sales campaign. Sally, will you join us? Next is Emily Ellison. Emily possesses a visionary spirit. From her past endeavors, founding the Atlanta Girls School, to now being at the helm of Literacy Action, she makes waves. In her current position, she's moving the future of Atlanta forward by promoting the personal skill that is most vital to modern life, the ability to read. Ellison's strategic mission for Literacy Action is to eradicate functional illiteracy among every age group in the metro area, and that's no small feat. Emily, will you join us? Everyone who takes up the call to lead and motivate does so with a certain amount of dream, vision, and preconceived ideas. And so what I'd like to do is to ask each of our panel members to respond to this first question before we ask them questions that are unique to their specific endeavors. So, what were your assumptions upon entering your respective industries, and how have those assumptions changed with experience? So we're just going to start with you, Kathy.
Well, I assumed, since I knew nothing about sports management, there wasn't a lot of assumptions, but I knew the importance of what the WNBA was. And I knew that it was part of giving back to the community, it was a part about winning games, and it was even bigger a part about role model in women. And since I've joined the Dream, and it's been 7 months, let me assure you, I had no clue how important the Dream was to women. And I'm going to connect the dots.
Well, we're going to ask you more about that later. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Next, Shelley, what were your assumptions?
I think one of them was I'm an affordable housing multifamily developer, and I think one of the assumptions I went in was that everyone in the community would understand how important and valuable our work is to the community. And unfortunately, I found that there is a lot of opposition, as well as it's become much more political even over the last 15 years that I've been doing this work. So we're really trying to hone in on the political side of things and really garner the support with folks who may not be as supportive as I was assuming that they would be.
Okay. Sally, what about you?
I would say an institutional advancement, which is actually a fancy word for fundraising. So that's what it is. It's raising money. And of course, marketing and communications. I think that two major assumptions that I came into the field and into this position is that if you have a solid mission and you have a solid story, that will lead to resources. I think the other assumption that I brought into the position is that to go on a landscape where the economic times are challenging, you would have to be creative. Assumption one still lives today. I think storytelling is the best way to raise money, raise awareness, because you're kind of living the life of somebody else and the difference that they've made in the field they're in. The second one, not so much. That assumption definitely has changed to me. I think my aha moment of change is, yes, during difficult times, people will donate, but more and more people want to see the metrics, the outcome of that. And so perhaps at the beginning I didn't see that coming through as much. I always knew I was metric driven, but now you actually have to use the word metrics and outcomes and so on. And so that truly did change, I think, in the last few years in the landscape for me.
Okay, we'll come back to that a little bit later. And then, what about you, Emily?
I would piggyback some on what Shelley and Sally have both said, because so much of what I do is fundraising. I think there's sometimes the assumption that you're doing something for a good cause and that people will automatically support that. But I found that there has to be a great deal of advocacy work around what we do, going to the elected officials, understanding public policy, those type of things, and trying to get out the word of, if there are close to 1 million adults in Metro Atlanta of people who cannot read, they have functional illiteracy, that is an economic impact issue, and getting that message across. One of the other things for me, I think, was when I first took the job, it was, okay, we're going to help people learn to read. I didn't realize what a great divide we still have in this country and in this city between the haves and the have-nots. The people we are fortunate to work with, to partner with, our clients, are coming out of profound poverty and generations of profound poverty. And it's not only that they need to learn to read, they have very few life skills and work skills. So this was a real awakening for me to understand the needs of our clients and how we can really partner with them to help move them to some kind of self-sufficiency.
Thank you. So we're going to come back to you, Betty. You guys have a 9-3 is my understanding of your record right now. What we all want to know is how you were able to take a struggling program and what changes did you actually implement to get you to the point that you are today?
Well, I had a great product in the team. So I knew when I bought and joined the Atlanta Dream that I had a good product we had gone from the worst season to the best season. We'd broken records, and that we broke history in the WNBA. And so I knew I had a good product. The challenge was we're the best kept secret in Atlanta, Georgia. And so my job is really simple. It's to get this secret out of the bag and tell everybody in Atlanta. And I'm all about free market. I just need to get everybody in the arena one time and we'll sell ourselves.
That's a great commercial. And
sorry, I did that a lot.
Commercial, because I was talking to your COO earlier, and he gave me a card, and I think does every seat have one where you can go online and get 2 free tickets to attend the game. So that's part of, I think, the great advertising and marketing that they're involved. So we need to see everybody at an Atlanta Dream game to support what Kathy Big Betty and the Atlanta Dream are doing in Atlanta. Shelley, as a woman traditionally in a male-dominated field, what has been your approach as a woman to the way that you run your business, and how do you think that's different?
Right, I appreciate that question, and before I specifically answer that, wanted to let you all know that I actually resigned from PRI this week on Tuesday.
So it must not have worked out.
That's right.
That did not get into the script. Don't know how we missed that.
But wait, there's more. On Wednesday, I started my own nonprofit affordable housing developer doing the same sort of mission work.
And what is your new business?
So my new business is called Tapestry Development Group, and the theory behind the name is that we bring together a variety of experts in our field to work together to create something beautiful and sustainable, and that we weave together the fabric of communities through housing provision. So anyways, your question is actually more timely than you might imagine, because I have been really thinking through what's our calling card, how do we move forward. Me and 2 of my colleagues actually resigned from PRI and started our new organization together. And so we've been really thinking through some of, you might just get through a business and just forget to think about sort of the bigger picture of what's important, what are your values. So we've been really thinking through that. So going back to your question now, as a woman in a male-dominated field, I think one of the strengths that we bring and the unique aspects is the fact that I think that we are much more collaborative than some of our male counterparts. And I was actually sharing that today with a colleague here, that I think that we're more suited to be able to sort of lay aside our ego in the name of trying to get the work done. And particularly for those of us involved in sort of mission-driven work, that sort of leads it more than having to have our name on the building, having to have our name out in front. We see ourselves more as collaborators and are willing to bring together experts and realize that we're one of the experts, but there are others that we bring to the table to foster this, this goal, this either success in business, in my case, the development of new housing units. So I think that's something that we bring that's different, and I actually think that that's something that we can market as women in the fact that I think people are attracted to organizations, to individuals, to CEO and leaders who do have that sense of humility, of recognizing that there are others that have strengths that can complement sometimes even our own weaknesses, and that can actually work to fulfill all of our goals on the professional and personal level.
Thank you very much. Sally, obviously Morehouse School of Medicine has been a significant part of the Atlanta community for quite some time, and it seems as though that you have been successful, and although you talked earlier about just fundraising, obviously you've used more of an integrated approach in terms of how you've been able to get the messages out about the Morehouse School of Medicine. Talk to us about how you've been able to do that, and what kind of additional awareness have you created in the community? I've certainly been on the campus. I've seen all the new beautiful buildings over there. So talk to us about how you've been able to do that.
Well, I think in the short period of time, it sounds like but it really is we in the institution. I happen to have a pretty great team, but I think the institution is 28 years old, which is pretty young in higher education world, so we're pretty new, we're newbies. And in that, one of the things that you start doing is your story starts getting complicated. So you have to streamline your story as you get older, kind of pick out the highlights. So a lot of what I've been able to do is be able to be a little more concise, make sure the tools that we're communicating with, whether it be the web, which we have a new website, and making sure that when we are in the community, there's a few things that you know that we do well, and that are expertise. We produce primary care physicians. That is what we do. We are a teaching institution. So I think the ways that I've been able to do it, again, is streamlining a few things, getting real good at articulating them, and then inviting people in, or us going out to the community. And when I say community, I'm talking globally. It's not just in Atlanta, it's in Georgia. I mean, we need to continually get preventative health in the state of Georgia and the nation and the globe. So again, it's just being very clear, very concise, very targeted, almost methodical in a nature. And once you get that, your first year, which some of the staff's here, you can get that going. Then you can do the fun kind of playful, sexy kind of ways and stories after that. But you have to build a foundation first. And I think because we grew so fast, and because we had multiple change in leaders over time, you know, they did have quite a few changes in presidents and so on, that perhaps the messaging might have gotten a little jumbled along the way. So really, I just took the great people that work there and the docs that are fabulous and the students and started telling their story outwardly. And I think that's the key, not expecting people to get it and come here, for us to go out to the community and being a part of that.
It's been great working with the Grady Health System Board, because obviously I've had an opportunity to interact with Morehouse students who obviously support Grady Hospital in terms of providing medical care. So I can certainly relate to a lot of the points that you're making. Emily, I think one of the questions we all might have, you know, Atlanta Girls School, very prestigious. How did you make that transition from youth education at the Atlanta Girls School to adult education at Literacy Action? And you talked a few minutes ago in your introduction about some of the challenges that were sort of surprising to you in the community.
Sure. A lot of it, I think, is just trying to provide the best opportunities for people, no matter whether it's young girls, adolescent girls, or people coming out of poverty, adults who aren't well educated. To create the Atlanta Girls School, we really wanted to have the option of an all-girls school in Atlanta, and there had not been one in Atlanta in 30-something years. And the research shows how adolescent girls can benefit from single-gender education. Some of the things that they start out doing when they're younger, they lose sight of those when they're in a co-ed environment. And also the research shows that we're hardwired differently. Our brains, girls and boys, and men and women. You might not have noticed that before, but there is some of that. And so to create an environment where girls could really flourish to become the leaders of tomorrow, that was very important. And also, I guess one of the things that I'm proudest of is that there's a great amount of diversity on our campus at Atlanta Girls School. I would dare say the greatest diversity probably in the city of independent schools. And I don't just mean racial diversity or cultural diversity, it's also socioeconomic diversity. We wanted to make sure that middle income families could afford to go to the Atlanta Girls School, and it not just be those who were on scholarship and then the upper middle class or wealthy students. So that was one piece, but that translated well to me to then go to work with adult learners who had not always had access to quality education, or they had not been taught in ways where they needed to learn how they could learn best. So many adult learners who dropped out of school, the reason they did is they have learning issues. It may be dyslexia, some kind of reading issue. Most of us in this room, we're fortunate enough that if we have a child who has dyslexia or some other kind of learning issue, we either have the resources or the wherewithal, the means to help get that child to the skank school, to the speech school, or to work with tutors or whatever it may be. And our clients didn't have that opportunity. So again, I think they're kind of all of one piece. Education, I think, is the framework for most of us to be able to reach our greatest potential as citizens, as leaders. And so it works well whether you're a 12-year-old at Atlanta Girls School or an 82-year-old grandmother raising your grandchildren at Literacy Action.
Great. Kathy, I'm going to come back to you because you obviously have lots of energy and enthusiasm.
I've been accused of that.
We can't tell that much about you. But you also have been very vocal about women in sports and girls in sports. Talk to us about that, and if you have some data or statistics you want to share, that might be interesting as well.
Well, you know, I'm going to even start at a higher point, because 20 years ago, I made partner at Ernst & Young, one of the first females. And all of a sudden, my email was flooded with, I believe, every female in Ernst & Young nationwide congratulating me. That was the beginning of my passion and my journey in understanding role models and how important it was for women to network together. So if you start with my passion at that level, you fast forward 20 years. Where we are today, we've made tremendous progress. But if you look at the statistics, we're still in the top leadership. Business women are less than 6% of the top leadership. We still have ways to go.
Absolutely.
Look at the politicians, look at the political system. Women are not there either. And so with all of that out there, we also know, and there's so much research done from Goldman Sachs to Ernst & Young to Columbus University, it goes on and on. The highest performing companies are the companies that have more women in leadership. So if you take the Fortune 500 companies, and you take, of those Fortune 500 companies, you take the top 25 companies out of there that has the highest women leadership, guess what you find? You find that those companies are at least 50% over the median of the financial performing other companies. The statistics go, I mean, I could rattle off more and more of, and so people are aware, and it's probably not just women, it's probably diversity. You make better decisions if you have a more diversity group. I think they said if you have 3 or more women on your board, that you are way like 60 or 70% in return on equity. I mean, the numbers go on and on. So now you might wonder, so that's important to know, because we need women helping us lead. And before I go any further, it's not just women. One of the things I learned very quickly when I bought the Atlanta Dream is I was surrounded by women. And I needed a man. So I believe in diversity. And Toby Wyman, every night when I go to bed, he is the first person I thank God for. So I don't want so Toby, don't take any of this personally, okay?
I think Toby can take it. I was chatting with him before everybody got here. I think he can handle it.
You think he can handle it?
He can handle it. So I think those comments are very well taken, because probably every single one of us, particularly the women, can relate to exactly your story. I mean, the speech that you just give, I have given multiple times in my company. You know, I try not to get on a soapbox about this issue. I'm a strong advocate for women leaders. I've made that same argument to our chief financial officer about the importance of having women in leadership roles. So I think that resonates with a lot of us in the room. So I certainly understand your passion around, it's not just unique to sports, that's the arena that you happen to be in. But it's an issue among women across various industry sectors.
Right, and then the connections with the sports industry is what happens when little girls play sports. And this is what our great players are. They're mentors to get women to play sports. If young girls play sports, they have a 20% higher graduation rate, not only in high school, but college as well. And if you look at employment rate between women at 25 and 35, if that woman played sports growing up, there's a 40% higher employment rate. I'm going to take you to the top. Fortune 500 companies. If you look at the women executives in the Fortune 500 companies, 80% played sports. I'm not saying sports is the only answer, but sports helps prepare women, young girls for competing in this world. And it is a big difference. And it's also, obesity rate goes down, teenage pregnancy goes down. And when you look at the Atlanta Dream, what we see is that we play a critical role because we want them to dream about playing professional sports. I was with a bunch of Girl Scouts last week, and some of the CEOs that were there are in the room today. And I asked the little girls, I said, when y'all grow up, what do y'all want to do? Only one of them wanted to play professional sports. I said, if we had a room full of boys, what percent would that be? And y'all know it'd be 70, 80%. We need little girls dreaming about playing professional sports, and that's what the dream's all about.
Great, thank you. Shelley, you talked about starting this new company apparently in the last week.
Poor thing.
And I admire you for doing that.
Thank you.
But obviously, public housing can be pretty controversial. So talk to us about how you keep the needs of the disadvantaged in the forefront, in front of all of us as members of the local Atlanta community, particularly given what's going on with sort of housing in general. And then now you're trying to advocate for housing for the disadvantaged.
Sure, it's a difficult issue, really. It is very controversial, but I think at the end of the day, I start with going very personal, and then I take it more to the macroeconomic level and to the policy level. Because we are oftentimes going to neighborhood associations and community groups to start there to build the groundswell of political support, then of course go on to the political officials and to the governing bodies in our local jurisdictions. So starting very personal, we try to ask people to identify with the fact that at any point in your life, did you live in an apartment? And was there a need? You know, after you graduated from college, where was your first home? Was it an apartment? Think about some of your nieces and nephews or daughters or granddaughters. Where are they living now? Think about some of our aging parents and grandparents, many of them moving into, apartment rentals. And so if you look on the continuum of, our community, there is a need for rental housing in our community at points in our lives, and a need for affordable housing in points of our own personal life. Many of the communities we develop also serve folks with special needs that may have mental health issues or substance abuse issues. And though that can be scary if you many people have stereotypes about who those people are. And what we try to do is bring it real personal and say, well, how many of you all, not with a show of hands of course, but how many of you all have a loved one, a family member who has struggled with mental illness or a substance abuse addiction? Because I think that transcends race, gender, age, socioeconomic conditions. I think all of us have a personal story and connection to someone in need who needs a compassionate landlord and housing community to help them and support them. And so I try to bring that personal piece to the fact that we as a community need to be compassionate, particularly in Atlanta with our history of Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement, that we need to be compassionate and embrace everyone in our community. And so that's sort of the moral imperative that we start with. But also the other piece is the economic incentives. There's many different reports and studies to show that it's economically more advantageous to us as taxpayers to provide the housing that we build, which is affordable housing with a layer of subsidy, but couples it with private financing, and oftentimes has support services to empower people to live independently, as opposed to living in institutions such as jails, mental institutions, hospitals. If you look at it on a per diem basis, in terms of the hundreds of dollars that we taxpayers pay for a woman who has been a substance abuser and is now in jail, and what happens to the kids in the foster care system. If you add that up from an economic perspective, it is much more advantageous for us as taxpayers to put in a much lower amount to help subsidize an apartment unit over time, and plus that helps that woman become a productive member of society, as well as the children, of course, being in a stable environment, hopefully then being able to really work on education and becoming a productive member of society instead of, and really working to break that cycle of poverty and some of the issues of why that woman became a substance abuser in the first place. So then, also then just looking from the public policy perspective, we also try to link our work, affordable housing, with the smart growth efforts that are going on in our city right now. So I come from a city planning background, and so trying to make the connection between transportation, health, education, and housing, and how important it is to have housing for low-income wage earners close to job centers. And then that's an impact to us on our health in terms of, you know, the environment we work in or live in and breathe in, but then also just in terms of, you know, just our own commutes, our own personal, you know, quality of life. And so we try to touch on it on a very different types of aspects: personal, professional, economic, and sort of public policy-wide.
So it sounds like you take a holistic approach. It's not just the housing, but the other support services.
That's right.
Okay.
And I think that's actually getting back to your original question of how women may be different than males in this field, but particularly I think in all of our fields, is that I think oftentimes we take maybe a more, not just collaborative approach, but sort of a comprehensive approach to the work we do, and seeing that our work is not just impacting, for instance, the health, but actually is impacting the quality of life in general. I think some of that comes as we are mothers, grandmothers, aunties. I think we have a perspective of the future and wanting to impact the future, and what Kathy's saying about impacting young girls. I think we tend to be bent and towards that as opposed to some of maybe our male counterparts.
Okay, thank you. Sally, there were a couple of references in the questions that I have been given in advance about your extensive travels and how that has impacted some of your work. So could you just give us a little bit of your history before you got to the Morehouse School of Medicine?
Yeah, I have almost all but one of my positions has been about somewhere between 50 and 70% of travel, whether it be regional or globally. Example, when I worked at Eli Lilly and Company, in 1 year I went to Asia over 20 times. Mind you, over 20 times. You know how many times a month sometimes I would go. When I worked at Cummins Engine Company, I was in all over the world: India, China, Brazil, and then obviously being in the field of philanthropy, working with alumni, marketing, communication, we are not a regional institution. So what the travel has done for me, and I know this is a strange analogy, but it's something I'd like to share, and I kind of learned it from two mentors. One is I have always known that I can do my job in travel. I can personally do it, I can professionally do it. That has to be an intentional decision that male, woman, whatever you are, you have to decide, I can do that. As you move in your career, to me, I intentionally took roles that moved me from, because after a while, after about 8 years, I was a global traveler. I mean, I could go in any country. I could actually take the train, even though we had drivers, but I could take a train on my own through Japan easily. I only fell asleep once and missed the stop, and it took me 2 hours to get back. But I learned the hard way. So I learned in the afternoon, I do not take that train because I would fall asleep. I just couldn't get over the jet lag. But so intentionally, I made sure I took roles that were global. I made sure I took roles that were regional. And I took roles that were required travel in rural areas as well as city areas. And I knew along the way, and I had great mentors saying, make sure you know what you don't like and what you do like. Because as you shape and pick the type of positions you want, travel does dictate how I see things. I treat going to Columbus, Georgia, or parts of Atlanta, or in Buckhead the same I do when I go to a foreign country. I look at the people around me, I look at the buildings, I look at the trees, I look at the language, I look at the style, and that helps me develop my messaging. It helps me develop where I'm at. If I didn't know anything about Columbus, Georgia, I just didn't. I mean, I was kind of joking because I use humor a lot. I think I might be one of the few African Americans in the nation that doesn't have any roots in the South. And I keep up, my mother keeps that. I said, we're northern. She was like, Sally, no, we don't. So the South, we just don't. I keep on thinking somebody's got to be related, and they're not. But this I mean, it sounds silly, but the reason I take some time on this is I had somebody very young in my career saying, you're one of those few people that love to travel and can get your work done. So you need to build your career around that. It is also an opportunity. I said messaging. It's also what I take in. I come out, like some places, I can't go a lot of times and back to back and back. I just can't do it. I just can't do it because it makes me a little crazy. It just does. Some cities are very difficult for me to travel in. So I make sure I set those cities in that messaging at a time in my life when I can do it. If I'm worn down, beat up, I can't do New York. I just can't do it. Because I come out, I miss my message because I've missed this, I'm all tired. So I use environments to learn about the people, but more importantly, and I'm a salesperson, to how I shape my message. I also intentionally picked careers. I have lived, just to give you an example, and I think this is that, especially for some of the younger women and men, I challenge you to do this. I lived in a small rural town in Indiana. I've lived in large metropolitan cities, Chicago, LA. I've lived in small towns in Connecticut. I have lived all over in different socioeconomic areas and geographic areas. And I will tell you, I think that helps shape what your comfort zone is, what you're good at. I'm very clear on what I'm good at. Some of the staff members here, they know, I can do details, but you really don't want me in the details because I'll drive you crazy. I really should be, that's just not my thing. So you learn, and I really did some intentional moves. I took a job in a small town in Indiana. I was like, oh, hell. I'll never forget saying to my mentor, what are you thinking? And he says, you've got to learn this. Because when you are running an organization and you're a vice president, because one day I said, I want to be a vice president of institutional finance, but there aren't a lot of women in them in certain institutions. I want to do that. I do want to be a head of a major national foundation. He says, you've got to learn, because you're going to have to connect how to ask and market in that community. And the only way you're going to learn it is to live there for a few years. So I did it in 4 years, and I stuck near university because that usually enriches the environment a little. The soil's a little fertile there to grow. But I think that I did do intentional. I do use travel, and I think you either get it, you like it, or you don't. And as your career moves along, you change your life around it. And my staff knows. I mean, I'm a traveler. So bottom line is, my life is around, my family knows it. My kids know it. You know, my ex-husband, current husband, he knows it. It becomes who you are, and it helps shape, and it's the exact same thing. And the two people that mentored me on this were both men, both executives, and they did the same thing, and they're both CEOs. And they said, you know what, we did take that dive in that small town, and we did do this. So it does help shape my lens, and it does make change a little bit easier, and it does make you appreciate some nice hotels, too.
I think we've all experienced a lot of what you're talking about, and just enriching our lives. And I think you also learned that no matter where you go in the world, the core values around people are the same basic human needs, and so that's a great story.
Yeah, it gives you breadth and depth. Absolutely. And I think that's really the message is, so when you have a staff, if you've got a hellraiser and you're an underperformer and a star, you can say to yourself, where was I that this kind of reminds me? I was in a community, well, there's this person a leader, and that you can kind of geographically help align where you are with people, and that just helps. I think it's a point of reference.
Absolutely. I was also reminded as you were talking about the book, The World is Flat. If you haven't read it, you need to. It's several hundred pages, but it's worth the effort, because having you describe that anywhere, anymore, we are all so connected anyway. I love that story. Emily, you were recently quoted as saying that the greatest indicator of a child's success in school is the educational level of his or her parents, especially the mother. How does Literacy Action use this as a foundation to create change for the clients that you deal with?
Great. Thank you for that question. What we're trying to do is really stop an intergenerational cycle of illiteracy and poverty. And if you can start, excuse me, with the parents or the grandparents, and sometimes the great-grandparents who are raising children, if you can raise their educational levels, their literacy levels, then you're going to impact the children who are being raised in those homes. There's been a 18-month study locally. Dennis Lockhart, the Federal Reserve Bank, some of you know, and Dr. Beverly Tatum at Spelman have been working on early childhood education before the children get to preschool or before they get to kindergarten. And one of the most important things they've said that has come out of that study is the impact that the parents have, or the grandparents, whoever's raising them, on those children. And so we feel like it's not enough to have wonderfully motivated, dedicated teachers or to have well-financed, well-endowed public school systems, that you also have to be directing funds, realizing the importance of educating the parents, those people who are raising the children. If you are sending something home in a book bag and saying, I need to meet with Johnny or meet with you Thursday, 3 o'clock, because Johnny's having trouble in his math class, but the grandparent who gets that note can't read it, they're not going to be involved in their child's education. Usually our clients have had such terrible educational experiences that the last place they want to end up is back in the principal's office or the schoolroom talking with a teacher. One, they're afraid they're going to be found out. There's a great deal of shame involved with someone who can't read and write well. So they don't want to be found out. It's not that they're not dedicated parents or grandparents, that they don't want the very best for their child, but they're coming up against obstacles that none of us, or most of us, have never even thought of. So that's one of the main things.
Are you finding that you do have success getting the mothers or the parents or grandparents involved?
Yes, when their own education is lifted, when they realize the importance, and I shouldn't even say that, they do realize the importance of education. That they know, they come to us, and it's as if we wrote the script for them. When they're going through our student orientation process and they tell their stories, they say, I was a child raised by children. I also had children at an early age. I've got to stop this. I've got to get an education for myself, so that I can get the job that I need, and I also need it so that my children can do that. And one of my favorite stories, and I go back to what Sally says, I think storytelling is so important. I can spill out statistics all day long and talking about the economic impact issue of this and why we need to educate adults. But the personal stories, I think, are the most profound, the most telling. We've been working with a woman who is a domestic in Atlanta, works for a well-known family. She's been raising her great-grandsons, and she has been at Literacy Action almost as long as I have. Her oldest grandson is now a sophomore at Fisk, and the other student is doing incredibly well in high school. I have no doubt that that would not have happened if she had not been at Literacy Action raising her own educational levels and then feeling confident that she could go home and help them with their homework.
Great story. Kathy, I'm going to ask you, and I hope you're okay to share this with us. Several years ago, you tragically lost your husband, Gary, to cancer after a short illness. How did dealing with that loss bring you to the place that you are now to do something very, very exciting in the world of sports?
You know, it was really interesting because you never think that can happen to you. And on November the 17th, 2006, Gary was diagnosed with cancer, and 6 weeks later I lost him.
Wow.
So my life changed immediately. And, you know, intellectually, you know that you will continue on because that's what you're built around. That's what my parents taught me. It's not about what happens to you, it's about how you handle it. So all of that intellectually works. It's just your heart that's not there. And so the first year, I stayed very busy, worked out constantly. That was my therapy, and made progress.
Okay.
The second year, I was a little angry because I thought I would progress a little bit further. And I knew I was going to do something different. One thing that carried me through is every morning I got up and I said, thank you for being born in the United States of America. Thank you that I was born to my parents, who just was wonderful support. And thank you that I had Gary for 20 years. And so I tried to be grateful for what I had, Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But at the end of the day, I knew my life would move on. And I don't know how it happened. I was very fortunate that I had the time that I could heal. And it was almost overnight, it seemed, that I was ready. My heart and my head came together. And I knew I wanted to do something different. And every time something was presented to me, a lot in the startup, entrepreneur, because that was my background, it was like, been there, done that.
Right.
Several, you know, it's just where you know what you're good at, you know what you're not good at.
Right.
And when somebody presented me the dream, and actually I sat down with the group that brought the team here, Lisa Border, Stacey Abrams, Laura Hodgson's, that whole group. And when they told me about what their vision was for the dream, that's when it hit me. Okay. That it was everything in the whole platform and the passion that I was about. And I felt, you know, I was ready to move on.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were going through that healing process, even though it didn't feel like it. But one day you woke up and you were able to face life and think about life in a very different way.
Yeah, and you know, you talk about my enthusiasm. Some of it is, you know, when you've been sick for a while, you don't know you're sick, but then when you feel better, you're like ready to go again. And that's kind of the way I felt, you know, even though during the process I felt like I was okay. Right. But when the head and the heart came together, then I knew all the enthusiasm, I was back being me again.
Right. Shelley, you had referenced earlier sort of the comprehensive approach that you use with affordable housing. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the strong community partners that you work with to make what you do possible, some of the specific names of organizations, and how you integrate all of this into this comprehensive approach?
Sure. Again, that goes back to the collaborative nature of sort of who I am and the work we do. As a nonprofit organization, I think we're aptly suited to bridge the public and the private sectors in order to influence the built community and influence individuals who want to move up in life. And so, you know, we work with a whole host of different partners. I would say some of our strongest partners have been at the public level in terms of the local jurisdictions. God bless Mayor Franklin, former mayor. She was one of our strongest advocates for affordable housing in our city. And that may or may not be something that she is known for, but she created some wonderful programs. She had a lot of that political will to get it done. And if you've heard some of her personal stories about her family having some experience with homelessness, I think that really motivated her. And so there were some wonderful bond programs, some other financing programs, and the political will to get it done. And we're certainly hoping and praying that Mayor Reed will also carry on some of that tradition as well. I think we have a little bit more education process with him to get there, but I'm hopeful for that. We've had some good support through DeKalb County and Gwinnett County, surprisingly. We work with the state of Georgia, the Department of Community Affairs. On the private sector side, we work with some local banks, but some of our strongest partners are nonprofit national tax credit syndicators and investors. That would be Enterprise Community Partners that some of you may know up in Columbia, Maryland. There's a group called Housing Partnership Network up in Boston. And then, interestingly enough, the nonprofit work that I've done historically has not gone to individuals to fundraise or to many foundations. And so there's going to be a shift to really focus a little more on that now as well. And I think that's really important to have that philanthropic support as well. In the past, the Toll Foundation has been helpful. The Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta here has been very helpful. And really, you know, young and seasoned leaders such as each one of you have been important partners to us, and sometimes just opening up opportunities. Sometimes we're able to get pro bono or discounted work. Not often. Most of the time we're struggling because we're paying the same price that any other, you know, developer is paying for construction costs, architectural costs, some attorney costs. And so we really are trying to build that collaboration and maybe get several folks who are in fields that affect us to really buy into our mission and maybe help in terms of some charitable time that they're willing to donate on sort of their professional side to help see these deals done.
Okay, terrific. So I have to ask you the question, because you spend a lot of time in corporate. I've spent a lot of time in corporate. I have to ask you how you made that transition to the university world, because there you've got people with tenure, I assume, and we've all sort of heard stories about university people and tenure professors and things like that. Not sure it's accurate or not, but we've heard these things.
It's so great being in medical school. We don't have tenure, but I have worked in institutions with tenure. Yes, you're absolutely right.
So what's it like to go from the kind of, you know, global traveler kind of role in corporate America to a university setting, small private school?
Well, I've done it 3 different times. So I started in working for a university, then I hopped to a major Capgemini America back in the day. So
okay,
it was a
check
major firm.
Capgemini, sure, yeah.
And then I did the hop way. So I could not stomach either way straight through. So I kind of mapped it out that way. So I went into higher education. I tried a medium private institution because that's what I knew, because that's where I went to school. So I tried where I knew that world. Went to corporate America, then went to a different role when I went back into higher education, and went to a public institution. And that's where I found, oh wow, this is totally different. Then went to a large Fortune 500 company in a smaller town, and then went back into an institution, a very elite private institution, very wealthy private institution, because I had to learn how to raise money with very wealthy constituents. It's a total different way of asking and learning that. Then I went back to corporate America, and now I'm at Morehouse School of Medicine. I did the hop because I do struggle with the difference in pace. So to answer your question, the biggest difference is pace. In higher education, I don't care what institution it is, it's intellectual, and there's going to be lots of dialogue. And sometimes there's closure, and sometimes there's no closure. You know, it's going to go. The professional school, like Morehouse School of Medicine, is an easier transition for me because it is practical. We are training physicians or public policy or health professionals, so at least it's tangible a little bit for me. And so I think one is closure in discussions. I know it sounds crazy, but you may not get closure, but you got to keep on moving. So that's one of the biggest changes. The other is not just its pace, and it's the breadth and depth of the workforce. As an executive in corporate America, I think that I was always with A and B students. I'm telling you, they were all A and B students. Even you can have different classes of people, admins, executives, but I'm telling you, they were the cream of the crop, A and B. In higher education, you have a long range. You have people with limited skills, people overqualified. The range of skill sets is probably my greatest, oh wow, oh wow, this is unbelievable. I can talk to somebody that's only worked at Morehouse School of Medicine, and then I can talk to somebody that has been at as many places I have and at the highest level functioning. And so, because as we know, historically, higher education has recruited certain people. They didn't pay. They never have paid as much as corporate, so you kind of get into the training and how much money do you re-engineer and so on. So one is with the people and the skill set. It is a large breadth and depth. I have enjoyed it. Every time I jump out of higher education and go back to corporate America, I'm a better professional in corporate America. I pick up skill sets, I pick up better listening, I fine-tune myself a little bit more. Then when I go back into higher education is a harder transition. My pace is a little too fast, and so I slow it down a little bit. I'm very the staff's going, I see. I'm very metric driven because if you've worked in as many Fortune 500 companies, you are metric driven, you know. Shareholder delight, that's what you're about. So I do have to make sure my autopilot personality and driver goes in a different gear. But the reason I went back to higher education is because it allows me to be passionate about what I care about in this nation. I only care about 3 things. I care about education. I can't teach. I just don't have the disposition. You don't want me to be teaching your children. But I can raise money for somebody to teach. I can help fund teaching. That's my way of helping in education. I believe you have to have education. I believe you have to have health. I just believe it. I just believe without health, I think it's a tough one. I think it's really tough. And then I think you have to have a mentor. You can have the worst family, but you need one mentor. You need somebody. So I was CEO, big brother, big sister for obviously the mentoring. I had to have a job where I worked in what I believe in. This job gives me both. I believe passionately about health and education. So I pick my careers on what I believe. Now, I'm old now, I can do that. Couldn't always do it. I'd take a few jobs I wasn't so passionate about, but to get the skill set. Yeah. I mean, I did. I mean, I had to do business development. I can, in a major Fortune 500 company, that wasn't really my thing, but boy, I learned how to do it. Because I had to learn how to do business analysis. I had to learn how to travel in a foreign country and negotiate. And I had to learn that intellectual capacity that I knew I didn't want to do forever, but I had to take that rotation because I knew I had that gap. So I use it more as a gaps analysis kind of for me. And now I'm kind of in that place where I decided I'm going to be 50, and I'm like, listen, I'm going to work where I'm passionate and believe about it and make a difference. So that's how I use the different landscapes to kind of help my plight and what I believe and work.
Well, there are more housekeeping here, so I'm not going to ask you if you're done with corporate or if you're going to get back into it. So that's a conversation for another day.
No, probably not. I'll answer. They know. I probably will dip back in. I think I could see one day I would love to maybe run a corporate foundation, or a communications area maybe of a major corporation, or run a foundation. So I think everybody knows I probably won't retire at Morehouse School of Medicine. Okay. Even though the president says I am.
We've got one last question for Emily. Emily, you were also quoted as saying that cities need to be global competitors, and how we must remember that an underskilled, undereducated workforce is a dramatic and direct economic impact issue. Can you talk specifically about how you've seen that play out here in Atlanta?
Sure. I don't know where these quotes are coming from, but it sounds pretty good. I took a few words. Did you? Yeah. I'm going to write it down myself. My background is a writer, and they say Flannery O'Connor quote is, "I don't know what I think until I read what I say." So I really don't know what I think until you read what I say. Well, I think that the world has changed so very much, obviously, since 1968 when Literacy Action was founded. At that time, while it was a very personal, difficult, challenging thing to be undereducated if you couldn't read, you could still be a hard worker, you could get a job and keep a job. You could probably even hide the fact that you couldn't read. These days, if you can't read, you get further and further behind every single day. Our clients come to us and they have no technology skills. How can we survive today without technology skills? Most time you can't even fill out an online job application unless you know how to read, unless you know how to answer questions, and unless you know how to have the technology skills to get online and fill an application. So that's one thing. That's the personal thing. The other, back to the global issue around Atlanta or any city, any region, if you don't have a skilled workforce, an educated workforce, there is no way we're going to be able to continue to attract industry, new businesses to our city. If the folks who are considering maybe relocating to Atlanta or any city where there's a huge number of undereducated adults, if they do their due diligence, they're going to say, why would I move here? Why would I relocate here? But then it goes even further. How many jobs are being taken overseas these days because the people in India maybe have greater technology skills? than the people in Atlanta, Georgia do. So I think that that is a huge piece. It's one of the things that we're always trying to talk about. There is the individual, personal, family tragedy of being undereducated. But then there is that economic impact issue. And that's what we try to get out in front of the Georgia General Assembly, the governor's office, all the elected officials. This is huge for us. We must turn the ship around. We must have an educated, skilled workforce, or again, we can't remain globally competitive. It's changing too quickly all the time.
Exactly. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. I just want to say one other quick thing. It's just been delightful to be on here. And I loved it when Kathy said, when I bought the Atlanta Dream, that's now my new dream. I want to be able to say, when I bought a professional
I think I'm going to recruit Sally. Your next step, you might need to buy the Dream from me.
That might be it.
Q&A. Questions for our panelists? Did you guys do the question, how do you achieve balance and become inspired?
That's a great question.
Well, I'll start out because I noticed that the photographs that you put up here, you might have noticed that my photograph, I had brown hair.
And I had long hair, so something happened.
But, so this came about, this foxy gray that I have now, since the fall of 2006, and that I think is from running a nonprofit agency. I think it's difficult to have a balanced life. I think a lot of people do it far better than I, but it can be a 24/7 job for sure. I think what Kathy is promoting is very important, that sports, being athletically, physically fit, that impacts the soul, the mind, the heart, all of those pieces. There were some of us who probably didn't grow up that way, for one, because maybe our mothers didn't, or we're challenged in that way. We're not very good at athletics, or it came about at a time when there weren't a lot of us in sports. But I think that's certainly a thing. I am now learning to play golf, to my husband's chagrin. You know, he loved it when I was willing just to drive the cart, but now that I am actually want my own driver and putter and those things. But I don't know about the rest of you, but for me it's a challenge. It has to be a concerted effort to try to have a balanced life.
She wants to know
I did,
how you did all
Yeah, she got it.
She's thinking.
travel with the family.
I actually picked my positions based on the stages that my children's lives were. This sounds crazy. I did my own consulting firm for 3 years. For one, when you are successful in your career in corporate America and you make a lot of money, you can almost get a little seduced by the money. And so one of the things that I did when I planned out when my kids were in junior high, because they're now 19 and 20, but when they're in junior high, I'm like, oh hell, I got to be around. So this was a great time. That was the time for me to do my consulting firm, because I could be with them, I could be around it. Now, I actually am not obviously a model of stay at home. I bless anybody that can do it. I don't have the temperament. My kids would be crazy if I stayed at home, because I just don't have that skill set and that talent. But I did know at certain times, I have 2 boys, that junior high was the age. I was less concerned when they're little, not concerned in high school at all and college now, but really in that junior high stage. So I picked my jobs when my kids were little. That's a great time to live in a bad little town. Because you know what, you can't do anything anyways, or you can take them with you. So the good thing is you can always pop them in the car and travel to a major metropolitan city. You can't do that when your kids are 13, because they don't want to hang with you, want to hang with their friends. So I do have jobs based on the stages of my children. And I know that sounds absolutely crazy, but it's the only way I could do it. I have I've married 2 incredible men in my lifetime. I always say I've only been in love twice, and I've married them both. So if I ever fall in love again, I'm not getting married again. But I have had forced support systems. I have support systems. I also have, I have to say, a very non-traditional relationship with my children. Their dad was the stay-at-home dad at one point. Then we both worked. They've never expected to be able to call in the office and me to pick up the phone. They always expect that if they text me, I know they need to get a hold of me. We've always built a little bit around, so they've built in my career with me. But I actually I couldn't take a job at Eli Lilly and Company when my kids were in junior high. I couldn't do it. You can't go to Asia 20 times in 1 year. You just can't do it. It's very difficult on your body and mind, to answer your other question, and back. So I was specific. I'm still very specific about it because I didn't know how to juggle otherwise. So I hope that answered your question.
Who has children on the panel? You know, Sally, no, okay. No children?
No children.
Okay. Shelley, you want to tackle that? And
Well, you've got a whole team of big children.
Yeah, I do. I have 11.
You have 11.
I'm just saying you have children.
That's a really good question. And so I have an 11-year-old foster son, and I have an 11-month-old biological son, and still nursing. So I was curious to hear how everyone else is juggling, because I'm still trying to figure that out myself. So, but to get to your question, we have both male and female on my staff, and I think one of the important things is to find ways that they can look beyond themselves. Particularly men who, particularly maybe even white men who have maybe had a comfortable middle-class upbringing. So putting them in situations where they have to interact with people who are different from themselves. Maybe it's volunteer situations, getting out on our properties, you know, since we have a variety of folks that we serve, I think is really important. Let's see here, and from the young woman's perspective, I think it's actually building confidence for them that they actually are equipped and can compete on the same level as men. I think sometimes, and I still do this, where I put qualifiers sometimes in even what I say, asking, well, this may be a stupid question, but, or, you know, just sort of putting yourself down unintentionally, even in a situation like that, and trying to help women be more mindful of not doing that, and then helping young men be more mindful of the world is bigger than their own lens.
I wanted to add one comment that, because I do have two males, and I would say this, I'm just as intentional as recruiting and hiring young men as I am young women. And staff knows, because I'm hiring somebody, and I was very intentional that he may not have had the perfect skill set, but he had enough potential, just like I do with young women. I think we have to be just as intentional with men at this stage, and certain males, than we do